Summer squash is sort of a chameleon. It doesn't have a real pronounced flavor of its own, but it will absorb all the flavors around it. So today I'm going to do something that you could either do with summer squash, you could do with okra, you could do with green beans. It's summer squash and tomato gravy, two things that are coming off the garden in masses for a lot of people. So I'm going to add a tablespoon of olive oil to the skillet, and to that I'm going to add a tablespoon of minced onion, and this is the start of the gravy. And we're going to stir that around long enough for the tomato to just soften up, no more than 30 seconds, and I'll probably shorten it for the show. But you just want it to start to soften, not to turn any kind of color whatsoever. This is a very mild flavored, and it's very traditional Southern food, so a lot of families have this in their background. It makes a great meal in the evening with some rice and maybe some cornbread. I've got a tablespoon of flour, and I'm stirring that in here. Just want to get it blended together a little bit. You may need to take it off the heat to make sure that you get that blending done well. And then the next step is to add a mixture of hot broth. Now this is low sodium chicken broth. It's about a half a cup. And to that I've added 2 tablespoons of the juice from the tomato. Now the tomatoes that we're going to use are basically seeded, but tomatoes have seeds. I have no problem with having a few in this recipe. So we've got a few seeds in there. You could use canned tomato juice if you wanted to, either your own or someone else's, but there's really no reason to. And having the juice already hot, you can heat that in your microwave, or you could bring it to a simmer here, but having it already hot just speeds the process up just a little bit. And we're going to cook this as it simmers until it sort of turns to a glaze and reduces just a little bit. Okay, you can see that this has now got a bit of a glaze to it, and so what I'm going to add to it now is 2 cups of relatively small diced tomatoes. Now these are Roma tomatoes, so they didn't have a lot of liquid in them to begin with, but you could use regular tomatoes, but you're going to waste a lot more because they have so much liquid in them. I'm going to turn this up and bring it to a simmer and let it simmer for about 5 minutes to start breaking down the tomatoes. Now remember to save the tomato juice that you lose off here, or as you seed the tomatoes, save all that, because you can use that in a soup or a stew later on. You may not need it today, but you can always stick it in the freezer and just pull it out later. Now when I'm doing this, when I was preparing the tomatoes, it was really fairly simple. Simply blanch the tomatoes for 40 to seconds to a minute, depending on how ripe they are, and then you can just use your finger. You may want to cut the stem end off, but do this over a bowl so you can catch what comes out, and simply take those seeds out. We don't want all that liquid for this, but we don't want to lose it forever either. So it's a very, very simple process. While we're waiting for the tomatoes to finish cooking down, remember that's going to take about 5 minutes. We'll take a short break here. Okay, you can see it started to thicken up. You do need to stir it fairly regularly because of the flour, it's going to try to stick to the pan just a little bit. But you can see how gorgeous that is now. The tomatoes have softened up and the flavors have had a chance to blend. So I'm going to set this here and we'll add the last few ingredients. I've got an 1/8 of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper, and here's where you're allowed to go crazy and let everyone know how much of a southern flavor you can take. And then I'm also going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. In the wintertime, if you were to make this same recipe with canned tomatoes, which you could do, you're really going to want to check the salt before you add it. And here you may decide that you need slightly more, but start with less. It's always better to add to it later on. I've also got 1½ teaspoons of fresh thyme. That really boosts the flavor, so make sure you get that in there before you add any salt, because that can help reduce your need for adding more salt to it. And then lastly, I'm going to add a tablespoon of half and half. Now that is simply to help give it a little bit of creaminess. If you didn't have half and half, you could use heavy cream, or you could use a pat of butter. But it really adds to the creaminess and really gives it not only the look of something that's been creamed, but the feel of it in your mouth as well. So that part is now ready to go, and what we're going to do is the last step, and here's where you can see what's available in the garden and start from there. I'm going to bring just about a half an inch of water in to boil in the pan, and you can see in here that I've got a simple steamer insert. If you have a steamer basket, feel free to use it. If you want to do this part in your microwave, you could do that. If you have a special vegetable steamer, that's another option. So there are a lot of choices. You could also use leftover vegetables as long as they're not cooked too much, because really all we want to do is warm them up. If you have okra, you can do that here. Leave it whole, just clean it, wash it, and then you're going to basically follow the same procedure. I'm going to wait for this to come to a full boil, and then I'm going to insert the vegetables, and I'm going to let them steam for 3 to 4 minutes, depending on how mature they are, how large the chunks are. Notice that I've simply cut the squash into chunks, and I'm using fairly young squash, which most people want to do at this time of year because their garden is producing so much they want to pick it early before it has a chance to get big. So this works really, really well for using up a lot of those extra vegetables that tend to start collecting this time of year. You can see the squash is nicely steamed, and by using 2 different kinds, we've got a lot more color variation, so you get a lot more prettiness to it doing it that way. I've got some brown rice in the bowl. I'm going to put some of the vegetables over the top of it, and then I'm going to add the tomato gravy over the top of that, and this makes one terrific Southern traditional dinner. I hope you'll give this one a try. This is summer squash and tomato gravy. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.